All right, I'm back for part 3 of the introductory podcast series for the introduction of the book, From Genesis to Revelation, a story you find yourself in. And it's a book that was released late December, and the press release is set to go out any time. And like I said earlier, my marketing representative at Balboa Press suggested that I get these done. And so I'm kind of in a rush to get it done. And then I just found out I have another reason to rush it. My doctor told me yesterday that he wants to cut off the tip of my nose, and he's got to get to it pretty quick. And I said, man, I got to get these videos done, so did a biopsy the other day, and I actually have to put a little concealer on there so I don't look like Rudolph. That'd be the only thing you're looking at. And along with that, my wife goes, this is about your story, the story you find yourself in, and you need to try to tell people a little bit more about yourself as you go through these. And I said, okay, well, all right, I'll do that. And that's part of it. My life in the sun. And a lot of this goes hand in hand with my codependent nature. What I discovered during the worst of my times is that codependent me, and where it originated from, and how it manifests. And it did manifest with a very kind of aggressive risk-taking persona. It's like when you got so much noise in your mind, the best way to subdue it is to do something that you shouldn't be doing. Or probably a little more aggressive than you should be doing it. And as a result, I've had 16 orthopedic surgeries, and lots of skin cancer. I mean, right now my arms are pop-marked with blisters, and I'm doing a chemo, hence the long sleeves that gross you out if I wasn't wearing long sleeves. And I worked my way through college and worked at a Southwest Ski Boats and Accessories. And it was located between my home and the college I went to, and I had to work my way through, and I had a nighttime job at JCPenney stocking the toy department. But the Southwest Ski Boats was owned by a guy, and I was his only employee, and I showed up every day at 1 o'clock, worked till 5, really would get most of my homework done during that period. In a period of time, because there wasn't a whole lot of traffic. All we sold was, it was a little shop sitting out on the front of the property of his mom's house, and it fronted I-10 between Orange and Beaumont. And between the shop and my dorm room was the ski area. It was right off the Neches River. We had the ski run, the jump, and all that. And we sponsored the Lamar ski team. And if I wasn't skiing, I was pulling somebody in the demo boat. But almost every day after work, Tyra would come home, and he worked at the plants, and this was his side gig, and we'd pull the demo boat on my way back to the dorm, or on my way to JCPenney, depending on where I was going. We'd ski. Then he'd pull the boat back to his shop, and I'd go on to my dorm. But I was out in the sun a lot. And I'm an avid golfer, or used to be, and so it's just a lot of sun exposure that I've experienced. And between skiing and football and motorcycles, and some other stupid things, I have these 16 orthopedic surgeries that I've had. I got limited use of this shoulder. This one needs a surgery. That's 6 surgeries, 6 in my left knee, and it needs to be replaced, or partially at least, and probably going to happen this year. So I had to get my nose done, my shoulder done, and my knee done. But that all kind of goes back to that really aggressive, behavior, kind of excessive risk taking, and that got me in trouble ultimately in my business career too, because it all just kind of stacked up. And that led to that crisis. And I started writing this book. The first words I wrote down were January 7th, 2021. So, I mean, I'm 2 years into this. And I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. I said, baby, am I crazy? And she'd go, no, you're not crazy. This is what you're supposed to be doing. And, you know, you're going to help people, even if we're not around to see it. And that really is kind of the nature of this book we just don't know what to expect. And anybody who's ever known me, they're going to be shocked that I'm doing this, but they're going to be even more shocked that I wrote that. And heaven forbid if they ever see this guy, because the vulnerability in that book is just over the top. But with that sun issue, you know, I got into the habit of wearing hats, and now it's just become my thing. I got hair, I'm not bald, but I like wearing hats. I've just gotten comfortable with it. And as I was growing up, you know, I was a fighter. And it's probably the only thing that my dad was really proud of. And that's just was kind of the environment that I grew up in. It was like, you know, you just got to be a badass, you know, and he loved that about that persona. And I have 3 brothers, and we always fought. I mean, we just never got along that well. But it was kind of fostered within the family environment. A lot of competition, a lot of reaching for acknowledgement and acceptance, and it affected all of us. And so I'm getting into the writing of the book, and then lo and behold, January 29th, 2021, Stu goes down with a major heart attack. I was working out here at my place, and I come walking in and collapse on the wood floor, and my wife is just freaking out. And hurt like a son of a bitch. And I thought it was done. I said, baby, all I could say was, baby, I'm sorry, because I was certain I was going to leave her. It's crazy. But the paramedics showed up like that. And they got me to the hospital. And I'm on the table. And they're like, Mr. Tillman, you got to be still. Quit moving. I said, man, I'm fucking hurting. And we can't sedate you. You know, this is life or death. We got about 20 minutes to get this right, or you're going to die. So they went in and put in the stent. And you know, for a guy that was so bulletproof, or at least I thought, it ended that day. So, you know, 3 days in ICU, and I come out and I feel like, hey, nothing ever happened. You know, but they got me on so many blood thinners, you know, that somebody could probably kill me with a bobby pin if you got me more than 3 places, you know. I only got 2 hands. Stopped the bleeding in 2 places. The third one, I'm going to bleed out. You just have to laugh. It's kind of funny. Well, that wasn't the end of it. I ended up having a second major heart attack May of last year, 2022. And it wasn't as severe at first, you know, and I drove myself to the hospital. You know, my wife's sitting next to me. I walk into the emergency room and I said, man, I'm having a heart attack. They go, really? I said, yeah, I'm having a heart attack. You know, you don't look like it. Well, look, I'm having a heart attack. This son of a bitch hurts. And we go, sit down in there. So I had to wait. Finally, you know, hey, I'm having a heart attack. Somebody come talk to me. And they brought me back, did some blood work, and they said, you have to wait 3 hours, you know, so we can see. Because the first blood test came back, we didn't see anything really. You got to wait 3 hours and take another one. So the next one came back, and well, yeah, we see something. And they brought me back, and 3 hours later, they took another blood test, and they went, holy shit, you're having a major heart attack. I said, yeah, that's what I've been telling you. So they took me to ICU, you know, 3 days in ICU, another surgery. And the doctor says, well, this is because you didn't listen to me. And I said, well, doc, that's not my forte. I'm not the poster child for listening to doctors. And I do now. So I take those blood thinners, and nobody pull out a bobby pin or you're liable to freak me out. But that's a little bit about the story that got here, and just know that there's just not a person that's ever known me is going to believe that I wrote this book. It's like God really knows how to pick them, and for some reason picked me. I'm not suggesting there's, necessarily something divine about it, but I couldn't stop. I mean, I was just pulled into it, and I said, God, times are hard. I got a lot of issues I'm dealing with, and I said, but if I'm going to do this, I'd rather have wisdom than relief. And if I start it, I'm not going to stop it. I'm going to dog it down. And I dogged it down, and I just worked really hard, trying to get this book done before the third heart attack. I've got to get it finished. But I made it, and it's out there. And as we move along, then I'll disclose maybe some other things about me. But I'm not a bad guy. I'm not a fighter anymore. But back to the book and the introduction. What I'm trying to do is bracket the book from the beginning to the end. And, I mentioned I asked for wisdom. And so I said, I need to kind of explain a little bit about where I went and how it materialized. And I've already mentioned this book on Edgar Casey and his interpretation of Revelation. And it's pretty good. And it really served as, gave me some insight as to how I was going to approach what I'm doing. But he doesn't really do a whole lot in the Old Testament. He doesn't really tie those things together. And that's not really accepted by mainstream religion, that approach. It's just too esoteric, it's too out there. It doesn't connect to anything else. Until now, because I have connected Genesis to Revelation. And it's tight. But I know it's not going to be welcomed. A lot of the practitioners of Christianity and really Judaism as well, they're going to look at this and they're going to go, we're going to dismiss it out of hand. Then others are going to attack it. And I kind of say, well, guys, you're in your sandbox. You're building fortresses and moats and castles and walls and stuff. That's what you build on the beach, right? Well, I'm over here, just look at me. I'm like the little girl in my own little sandbox. And I'm making caterpillars and butterflies. And I want you to hold on to that, because I'm going to use that visual as we go through this. But I'm on another rail. I'm on another track. If you want to come into my sandbox and talk about the things I'm talking about, hey, I'm all about it. But I'm not going to go to yours. I've lived there my whole life, and it didn't work for me, and now I know why. And I'm not anti-religion. I just think the way that Genesis has been presented sets up everything else to enable doctrines to be introduced that really don't get you closer. They actually move you further away from going in. And the book talks about that, but I'm going to hit on some of it here in the introduction. But to get started, the first thing that I want to do is kind of look at modern psychology. Because the Bible, as I walk you through it, it's the quintessential book on psychology. It's all about psychology, the psychology of the human being. And it's, from the beginning to the end, it's all about you, each one of us, our own journey, and what it looks like at the start and what it looks like at the end. And what I'm going to ultimately say, I mean, there's two big points, or maybe shifts in doctrine, that I present in the Old Testament. And the first giant of psychology that I've looked at quite a bit is Carl Jung. And in his Jungian, I didn't get it right the other day. I actually practiced that, but I still don't get it right. He came up with the anima and the animus. The anima is the feminine, and the animus is the masculine of our psychology. And he has a quote. Man's task is to become conscious of the contents that presses from the unconscious. And until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Now, those two quotes are in the book. I had my last section as I have a series of Jung quotes to kind of cap off the book. And we're going to find the start of Genesis is his philosophy. I mean, it really fits very well. And then Jung goes on to talk about shadow work. The process of bringing the unconscious to consciousness is shadow work. But that's really something that happens at the end. That's New Testament. We're going to talk about that at that point. But initially, it's how is our psychology set up? Then the next thing is a book by Lee Bladen, and it's called Awakening to Wholeness. And I got permission from Lee to put a lot of content of his out of that book in pieces of this book, because in my process I had to understand what ego was, because I felt mine being crushed. And I go back to a point in writing this book. Like I said the other day, I was being drawn into Isaiah, the Pharaoh in Egypt and what it meant. Excuse me. And maybe I didn't put it. You know what I did yesterday? I did this whole video and got to the end. And right at the end, my screen went dark and said, "You don't have enough storage." I went, "Oh, this is hard, So I got to go back and do it again. So I'm not really sure what I said or what I didn't say. But in Isaiah, I was drawn to Isaiah. And where it says, I think it's chapter 30, Pharaoh will be your shame and Egypt your humiliation, or it's flipped around. And I went, wow, that sounds a whole lot like I'm feeling. The ego's making me feel shame. It's making me feel humiliated, and then going back to my primary childhood one, it was all about shame and all about humiliation. And maybe that'll be something I tell you about later to get to know a little bit more about me. Make my wife happy. And so I looked it up. I went online and said, ego equals Pharaoh. Is there anything out there? And sure enough, I found some stuff. And one of those was Spirit of the Scripture website.com, spiritofthescripture.com. And it's managed and maintained, really, it's his website, Joshua Tillman, and it's no relation to me. It's Tilghman. And what I found was this just vast wealth of esoteric knowledge. I mean, this guy is really good. He has a lot of this stuff. I mean, he's a younger guy. I'm never going to catch up to that guy. I don't need to, because I go there now. And I contacted Joshua, and I got permission to use his material in this book and this both books. And so, just know a lot of my concepts have originated in my thinking. He's really helped me along. I mean, he's probably one of the most important people in my life that I have never met. And anybody that's interested in learning more about this, you've just got to go there. And it's just a great resource. And so that's where a big chunk of that knowledge began, and then I started connecting threads. And I'm not suggesting that he hasn't. I just haven't seen all of it connected like I've attempted to do. And so between Carl Jung and his psychology, and Lee Bladen and his book on the ego and how the ego is constructed, how it develops, we're gonna use that as we look at the Old Testament. And then secondly is the ending. And then so there's Eckhart Tolle, and he talks, his book Power of Now, I think his main theme, not to be presumptuous, but he's up here. But it's about being present, having appreciation for the present. And one of his quotes is, "It is through gratitude for the present moment that the spiritual dimensions of life opens up." And with that, I'm gonna go to a verse, and you gotta apologize for now. I'm wearing my glasses, so I'm gonna be reading a lot. I can't commit all this stuff to memory. Verse 91 of the Gospel of Thomas, they said to him, "Tell us who you are so that we may believe in you." And he said to them, "You examine the face of heaven and earth, but you have not come to know the one who is in your presence. And you do not know how to examine the present moment." So, key to ascending spiritually is you've got to learn how to examine the present moment. Because the subconscious generates thoughts, and every one of them is either ruminating on the past or it's anxiety about the future. None of them are about the present moment. And the ability to observe your subconscious happens in the present moment. So you've got to learn how to become present. And then you'll be able to see those thoughts, and you push out enough space to where you can start to watch them. Then you can see, okay, I'm going to go back to the past, or I'm stressing about the future. What is the source of that fear or that anxiety? Shame. And then that's the shadow work. And that's where you go in and you do that work. And that brings me to probably the most important resource that I have, because I think she saved my life. And that would be Dr. LaPera. When I entered, it was probably in 2018 when I started to really go, man, I am messed up. Tom, I got all these patterns in my life and they just keep repeating, and I want them to stop. And he goes, well, you're getting, God's beating up on you, man. Or maybe it's Satan, that he's attacking you because he thinks that you're a high potential guy, as do I, as he thought I was, because he knew my heart. And he's just an incredibly spiritual guy. He is tops. I've known him for a long time. He's my attorney, business partner. Just awesome. And I said, Tom, I'm doing a good enough job whacking myself. I don't need God whacking on me. And I think it's all coming from inside. I just don't see a Satan out there. It's all originating in me. I mean, I'm making this happen. I don't understand why, because I don't want it to happen. I feel like Paul, saying, hey, I got my members doing one thing, and then I got my mind wanting to do something else. This is a war within me. I want to do good, but then I do things that are evil. Paul says I can't make sense of it. Well, then heck, I didn't either. And so Dr. LaPera is a psychologist, and she has quite the story of her own, and she's codependent. And I picked her up in the stage of her journey, following her on Instagram. She had about 750,000 followers when I picked her up, and she just was speaking right to me. And it was really, that was the only place I really knew to go. There was a forum on Quora that I would see some stuff, and it was mostly about narcissism. And that's where I started to pick up, hey man, codependence and narcissists, they're attracted like magnets. I mean, they have a dysfunction. They both have a parasitic toxicity to them, and they're attracted to each other because one gives and the other, for a while will show you love, but ultimately you realize that it never really was love in the true sense. It was conditional. It's how you made them feel. They loved how you made them feel. But eventually that runs its course, and as the story goes, typically the codependent has the trauma bond, and they get slammed, and the narcissist just kind of shuffles along, and you're left to kind of pick up the pieces and make some sense of it. But by then you're a shadow of yourself, and as I was, and then it's also kind of common knowledge or perspective that typically leads the codependent to an awakening experience, because by that time your ego is so crushed that you're closer to that baby than you ever have been and you ever will be again. And if you can grab that moment and make lemonade out of lemons and choose to look at these experiences, learning opportunities, and rather than place blame and have bitterness and anger about it, then you have an opportunity to do something fantastic with it. And and I don't look at narcissists as being bad or codependents being bad. It's just how we're made, and both can come from the same household, and that happened in my house. And it just depends on where you fit and which parent influenced you the most at critical times. And my main child wound happened during my early toddler years, and it's just kind of bizarre that it had this kind of effect on me, but it had to do with the way I was potty trained, and it's an issue that I carried through with me the rest of my life. I won't get into it too deep, but I went on 3 golf trips with my dad. One was 28, 32, and 35, and each of those trips I couldn't go to the bathroom. And my dad goes, "Oh man, you always have had this problem. I remember when you were a kid, this and that. We take you to the doctor, and you'd be stopped up for so long. Everybody would come in the house and take a look at your poop." I mean, it was just crazy. But that was the cornerstone of my fear of humiliation and my fear of shame, and it manifested in a very brutal way. So Dr. LaPera and her material, this book that I wrote came out January 20, and her first book came out I think March of 20, so 3 months later. And I relied on her Instagram for the information to kind of therapy myself through. Shadow work, that's the place to go. That's the book. It's frickin' loaded. So, but that's kind of on the backside. That's how when we start discussing the end, you do the shadow work. You learn how to meditate.